Hey everybody, Jim at JSTAN Studio here, and I just wanted to share with you a project that I've just finished up. So this was a commission that came in from a friend of mine to produce a series of artworks for what's called the Stations of Light, or the Way of Light, or the Stations of Easter. It has a lot of names, but basically it's a Catholic devotion that's very similar to the Stations of the Cross, but whereas the Stations of the Cross focus on everything leading up to Jesus' death and finally placing him in the tomb, the Stations of Light, or the Stations of Easter, focus on everything that happens after the resurrection. So there are 14 stations, and this person wanted me to complete some artwork for each of those stations. And then with the way that they were going to be mounting it, they were mounting it in collage frames that had 16 openings. So I created an opening card and a closing card, if you will, to kind of frame those stations. So I want to share that with you right now. What you're looking at here is the first illustration, which is just basically like a title card, more or less. And I wanted something that was, very bright and colorful that would kind of set the tone and mood for things moving forward. I had the cross with a purple cloth draped over the top. I wanted the lighting, or the lettering, to be very clear and happy and bubbly looking. So that was the first opening card that I made. The first station is Jesus rises from the dead. So what I wanted to do here was kind of take things from a little bit of a different angle. A lot of times when people depict the resurrection, it's just a picture of Jesus in sort of this triumphant pose. But what I did here was something a little bit different. I wanted like the gates of hell, like we were looking out of hell and we see these gates broken in and smashed. So I was kind of depicting the resurrection in a little bit more of an abstract way, so that, yes, Jesus dies, but as he descends to the dead and into hell, he smashes his way through the gates and greets all of the people who are saved and who are awaiting his resurrection to come with him to heaven. So that was the thought process behind here, to have a very dark and foreboding look, but to see the rays of light that are breaking through and the gates that have been smashed down. The second of the stations is the disciples finding the tomb empty. So I kind of went with a more or less literal interpretation of that. And I've always really liked the composition of people in shadow looking into a dark place where they're very brightly lit from behind. I've just always liked the way that looks. So in here I have the two disciples, Peter and John, looking down into the tomb. You see the burial cloths kind of folded up on the side of this stone slab. It's very dark inside, but there's this beam of light shining inside. So that was my idea for the second station. The third station, Jesus meets Mary Magdalene. So I went pretty literal with this again. It's just Mary Magdalene in the foreground. We see her kind of weeping from behind. Jesus standing triumphant with this banner of victory in his arms, this glorified body that's shining. That was the approach that I took for this one. And here we have the fourth station, where Jesus meets the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. I really like this one. I like the way that it turned out. And the reason for this, I just like the angle of shooting past Jesus. You can tell that it's Jesus because he has this wound in his hand. And you see the two disciples kind of coming down the hill away from Jerusalem. This is kind of blurred out in the background. And they're kind of, one is gesturing like, what's happening? The other's kind of slouched like maybe, we put all our hope in this Jesus and now he's dead. Like, what does this all mean? And they're coming downhill. They're coming from the heights of this encounter with Jesus, coming down the hill, away from Jerusalem, away from God, away from that hope and that salvation. But here is Jesus standing there waiting for them, waiting to meet them. I thought that this was just kind of an interesting way to depict this scene. It's one of my favorites out of the group that I made here. And then this station is Jesus is made known in the breaking of the bread. So again, I went a little bit more literal with this. I'm depicting Jesus with a white garment, a red streak on the sleeve, and then purple sort of stole-looking scarf type thing. And the reason that I went with that purple vestment look is because this is the vestment that a priest will wear in the confessional. It's this is just typically the vestment that you would see, is this purple stole. And I wanted to depict Jesus in that garb because after the resurrection, the real mission and message to me seems to be peace, reconciliation, forgiveness, love. And it really, that forgiving Jesus is really what I saw in a lot of these stations. And we have the other two disciples recognizing him in the Eucharist here, and they are, their hearts are aflame, is how it's described in the Gospel, and they are surprised and shocked and happy maybe, but also trying to put things together as they recognize the risen Jesus. So that was my thought for this one. The sixth station is Jesus appearing to his disciples. In all honesty, I wasn't as pleased with this one. I thought this was one of the less inspired of the depictions that I came up with, but still, I wanted this heavy beam across the door because the doors are locked. The apostles are locked in there for fear of the Jews. But here is Jesus standing in front of this locked door, entering into the midst of them, making this sign of peace and blessing over them, again with that purple stole, signifying this desire to reconcile, to communicate forgiveness and love to the disciples. And the seventh station is Jesus bestowing upon the apostles the ability and the power to forgive sins. So I have him blessing this apostle, and he has a knotted cord, but as you see, Jesus' hand extends over him, and the knot sort of dissolves is kind of the impression that I wanted to give there. So the sins in people's lives, the faults and foibles of people, even when we've deliberately turned away from God, these are knots in our lives, but Jesus' power, Jesus' mercy undoes those knots. And I also depicted this disciple in very similar garb to Jesus, and that was deliberate because in so doing, in granting these disciples the power to forgive sins, he's kind of entrusting to them this mission of forgiveness and this mission of being other Christs. And I wanted to depict that in how the apostles appeared and how they looked, and also in, like I said, that dissolution of the knot. I thought that was an interesting angle to take on it, and I was pretty pleased with the way this one turned out. This is the eighth station, which is Jesus confirms the faith of Thomas. So I wanted to depict Jesus' wounds. I've always just had a thing for Jesus' wounds. Like, it's always interesting to me that Jesus keeps these wounds, these signs of love, even in his glorified, resurrected body. They're still there. And I've always thought that that was an interesting piece. So I wanted to kind of make that front and center as Jesus confirms the faith of Thomas. This is the Lord meets the disciples on the shore of Lake Tiberias. So I had Jesus sitting on the rock, beckoning them closer. You see different reactions from the apostles in the boat. This guy on the front is, kind of cheering and waving. The other people maybe are kind of taken aback. You have Peter in the water swimming towards Jesus. And you have the flame where Jesus is going to bake the fish that they've caught and eat with them. The 10th station is Jesus confers the primacy on Peter. And this was one of my favorites as well. You have Peter shackled, basically communicating that his life is not his own anymore, and he has the sheep on his shoulders. So he's feeding the sheep, he's tending the lambs, he's feeding the Lord's sheep, essentially. And this shackle, like I said, his life is not his own. I gave him a pallium, which is a symbol of the Pope. So kind of continuing that papal theme, that primacy theme. And then underneath this green cloak that I've put him in, is a purple undershirt. And the reason that I did that is because everything underneath is forgiveness. This primacy is conferred on Peter primarily because he loves Jesus and because he's been forgiven by Jesus. You see that great scene in this gospel story where Jesus is asking Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Feed my lambs. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Tend my sheep. And it's like, that forgiveness is really, I think, a pivotal part in Peter's life, that forgiveness of having denied Jesus 3 times. So this is one of the favorites of mine that I did on this one. And this one is Jesus entrusting to the disciples the mission to the world. So I went a little bit more basic on this one, I feel like, but this globalness of the mission that Jesus entrusts these disciples with, that was what I was trying to depict here. And you have the 12 around the earth kind of unified in this golden chain, bringing the message of forgiveness, the message of God's love to the whole world. This one is the ascension of Jesus, and I wanted to make sure that I had, Jesus in the foreground ascending to the Father, but I also wanted to have a little bit of the reaction of the apostles looking upward at him, and I imagine that the apostles were taken aback and confused and not really sure what the next steps were here. So I wanted to make sure that I had them in the frame a little bit as well. Station 13 is Waiting for the Holy Spirit with Mary. And I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do with this one, but what I ended up doing was having Mary's head above everyone, kind of cloaking them all in her mantle. And I wanted to have all of the apostles represented. Originally, my thought was to include everybody's face, but this is 4 inches by 6 inches. So if I were to include everybody's face, you wouldn't be able to make much detail out or anything. So I decided to go instead with the symbols of the apostles. So you have Peter with the key straight below. You have John with the eagle. You have St. Andrew with the X-shaped crucifix or cross. And you just have all of the different symbols of the apostles who are all underneath the mantle of Mary, waiting for the coming of the Holy Spirit. And then the final station is the sending of the promised Holy Spirit. And I was pretty pleased with the way this one turned out, too. I kind of went for a stained glass sort of effect and this sort of swooping, swirling action with the white dove in the center. I tried to offset that with a little bit of black so that there were these bright reds and oranges, but also these deep, dark blacks that went in as well. And there's a little bit of metallic paint in here of gold that kind of catches the light in certain angles, which I was really pleased with. So that concludes the set. It's a set of 16 with the intro card and the concluding card. But I just wanted to kind of share that with you so that you could see my thoughts, my process, and what I did for this really, really fun commission. I really hope that the person is really going to enjoy this. I think she will. But yeah, I wanted to share that with you. So I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for tuning in, and God bless and happy painting.